The rain fell like shattered glass, slicing through the night with relentless fury. Every drop echoed against the wooden porch, drowning out the faint sound of her footsteps. She stood there, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with something that looked like both fear and surrender. A suitcase rested at her feet, its wheels muddy, the handle trembling slightly in her hand. When she finally whispered, her voice barely rose above the storm. I had nowhere else to go, and in that single moment, standing in the doorway of his quiet suburban home, Ryan Brooks forgot how to breathe. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of forgiveness, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. This story might just remind you how love can heal even the deepest scars. Ryan had never imagined seeing her again. It had been 4 years since Olivia left. 4 years since the letter, short, cold, final, arrived on his kitchen counter, ending a love story that had once felt like forever. She had gone chasing dreams, or perhaps running from ghosts neither of them had the strength to face. He had moved on, or at least that's what he told himself. He had built a quiet life in the small coastal town of Wilmington, North Carolina. Days filled with work at the construction site, evenings spent fixing up his old house, and nights falling asleep to the sound of the ocean wind brushing against the windows. It was peaceful, predictable, and empty. Now, staring at her, drenched under the downpour, that old ache rushed back. She hadn't changed much. Maybe thinner, maybe more tired. Her once bright hazel eyes had dimmed, replaced by something fragile and haunted. The last time he saw her, she was wearing a sundress, laughing under the summer sky. Now, she wore a gray trench coat, soaked through, with raindrops trickling down her trembling chin. Ryan wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. He wanted to ask where she'd been, what had happened, why she was standing at his door in the middle of the night. But something in her eyes told him not to. So instead, he stepped aside. Without a word, she walked in, dragging her suitcase across the threshold of the home she once called hers. The warmth of the house wrapped around her like an old memory. The faint smell of coffee, the creak of the wooden floor, the family photo still hanging in the hallway, her photo. He hadn't taken it down. Maybe because part of him was still waiting for this impossible moment. As she stood there, shivering, he grabbed a towel from the hallway closet and handed it to her. She murmured a soft thank you and began to dry her face, her hands shaking. She looked so small, so broken, that Ryan felt his chest tighten. When she finally spoke again, her voice was a whisper of exhaustion. I didn't know where else to go, Ryan. I'm sorry. I really am. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but instead, he just said, you should get warm. She nodded, eyes downcast. They sat across from each other in silence, the sound of rain muffled by the walls. The air between them was heavy, filled with words left unsaid, regrets long buried. Ryan couldn't stop looking at her. Every scar, every line, every flicker of pain in her eyes seemed to tell a story he hadn't heard yet. Hours later, when the rain finally softened, Olivia began to speak. She told him about the years she'd been gone, how she had moved to Chicago after leaving him, chasing a job and a promise that turned out to be nothing but lies. She fell in love again with someone who slowly stripped her of everything, her savings, her self-worth, and finally, her freedom. He had hurt her in ways she couldn't even describe. When she finally escaped, all she had left was the clothes on her back and a suitcase of memories she didn't want. She paused often as she spoke, as if searching for the strength to continue. I thought I could make it on my own, she said softly. But when the storms got bad, and I had nowhere left, I kept thinking about here, about you. Ryan's hands clenched. He wanted to be angry, to remind her how she'd walked away when he needed her most. But seeing her now, broken and apologetic, he realized something painful. He had never stopped caring. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Olivia stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the quiet street. She looked lost, like someone who had forgotten how to belong. Ryan brewed coffee and handed her a cup. She smiled faintly. "Still 2 sugars?" she asked. He nodded, and for the first time in years, they shared a small laugh. It felt like breathing after a long time underwater. Days turned into weeks. She stayed in the guest room, trying to rebuild her life piece by piece. She got a part-time job at a nearby bookstore, started helping Ryan with chores, and began to smile again. Small, fleeting smiles that made his heart ache. Sometimes at night, he could hear her crying softly. He never went to her door, but he wanted to. He wanted to tell her she was safe now, that she didn't have to run anymore. But even as things began to heal, the distance between them lingered. Ryan still carried the pain of her leaving, and she still carried the guilt of what she'd done. There were moments, shared glances, half-finished conversations, where it felt like old love might rise again. But both were too afraid to touch it. One evening, while Ryan was fixing the porch light, Olivia came outside. The golden light of sunset painted her face, and for the first time, he noticed the strength in her eyes again. "Ryan," she said quietly, "why did you let me in that night?" He paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "Because you knocked," he said simply. She smiled through tears. "After everything I did, I thought you'd hate me." He looked at her for a long moment. "I tried. Believe me, I tried. But love doesn't turn off that easy." Her lips trembled. "You still love me?" "I never stopped." The air between them thickened with emotion. She took a hesitant step forward, but before she could speak, Ryan gently shook his head. "You don't have to say anything. Just stay this time." That night, as the stars returned to the sky, Olivia sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The air smelled like rain and new beginnings. She realized that forgiveness wasn't something you earned. It was something given, freely, by those strong enough to love beyond pain. Weeks passed, and the small town began to see them together again. Two broken souls finding their way back to each other. They weren't rushing it. They weren't pretending nothing had happened. They were simply healing, slowly, honestly, beautifully. One day, as autumn painted the trees in gold, Olivia found the courage to speak what had been in her heart since that night in the rain. She found Ryan working in the garden, his hands covered in soil, his face calm. She knelt beside him, tears shining in her eyes. "You saved me, Ryan. You really did." He looked up, smiling softly. "You saved yourself. I just opened the door." And in that moment she understood. The home she'd been searching for wasn't a place. It was him. It was the quiet strength in his forgiveness, the kindness in his silence, the love that had waded through storms and years. Sometimes life breaks you so completely that you forget what warmth feels like. But when you find it again, when someone lets you back in despite the pain, you realize that love isn't about perfection, it's about grace, about choosing to open the door even when you're scared of who's standing on the other side. So if this story touched your heart, if you believe that forgiveness is stronger than pride and that love deserves a second chance, then please like, share, and subscribe. Let's remind the world that kindness still matters. Before you go, tell us in the comments, would you open the door for someone who once broke your heart? Olivia did not know what the future held. Maybe they'd find love again. Maybe they'd just find peace. But as she stood beside Ryan that evening, watching the sky turn gold over the quiet street, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't lost anymore. And for the first time in a long time, neither was he.